Hi everyone. So here we are thinking about feedback. So last week you read a bunch of articles about feedback and I've been thinking about what Tavani has said. Today, Erica and I gave you more things to think about when it comes to feedback, some more articles that were specific about writing instruction, and now we're asking you to come up with a tool, maybe. A tool that will help you do the things that feedback needs to do in writing instruction. So let's get started with a couple of ways to think about this. Before I create a feedback tool, I might first think about what we even know about feedback. You did this last week and this week with reading. But for example, these might be some guiding questions for you to think about in your own notebook. What do we know about feedback? Well, one thing we know is that it has to be timely, right? They have to get feedback when they're able to make changes in their writing. If they receive our feedback at the end of an assignment, along with the grade, not much is going to change in the writing instruction. We also know that feedback has to be specific and something that can actually be done for a student, understood. So there's lots of things that we know about feedback. So maybe before you create this tool, remind yourself, what do we know about feedback from the work we did last week and the readings you did this week? We also want to think about what we know about our writing instruction. For example, what do we have in place in our writing instruction that will help us provide feedback? Do we have places where we already have conferences set up or structure for us to speak individually with students? Or maybe we don't, but we do have drafts in place where students write multiple drafts, or they at least write one draft, and perhaps we can shift our timing to draft feedback rather than end of the assessment feedback. Or maybe we have peer conversation built into our writing instruction. There's lots of things that we already know about our writing instruction that we could place here when we're thinking about when and how we might build a feedback tool. Then of course we want to think about what students need. What do they need to know when we give feedback? One of the things we learned about feedback is that we can't overwhelm students. So what do they need to know? As you read, you might have noticed that one of the things they need to know are what errors they're making instead of just simple mistakes. Or what are the things that I might specifically want to make sure my students need to know? Something about an introduction or a closing or transitions. And so perhaps this is writing genre specific, depending on what it is that I really want to think about. And finally, what I might think about is, I'm sorry, not finally, but what I might think about is what could the tool look like? Is this a written tool that I want to provide students? Is this a voice recorded tool that I want to give to students? Or is this maybe a peer tool that they're going to use? And then I love this last part because this is actually what comes next after feedback. And that is, what else are they going to need to know or what else do they need in order to make the feedback useful? So for example, do they need a revision station created as a result of the feedback tool? Or do they just need do I maybe need to create a mini lesson? So these are my drafts of my notes. Yours will look different, but these are 5 questions that might guide us when we start to think about a feedback tool. Now let me show you a couple of feedback tools that your colleagues have come up with in the past. One feedback tool that I love comes from Kristen Bachhold's paper that some of you might have read. She was trying to find a way to let students know in the middle of the process what was working and what might need revision. And you'll see, here's her feedback tool called What I Loved About Your Paper. And she has 2 identical columns. One marked What I Loved About Your Paper, another marked What Needs Revision. And in these identical columns, she might mark a few, 1, 2, 3 things on what is working. Not everything, but maybe there's a great title, maybe the vocabulary is spelled correctly, maybe the overall message. And this means, you know what? You got it. Don't change it. I'm loving it. And then over here, under what needs revision, Perhaps I'm going to mark the reader's attention needs some revision. There's more information is needed, and maybe there's no last line. And now the student knows exactly what needs revision as they're going on. Notice not everything's marked. That means that there's lots of room for improvement, but specifically these 3 things need revision, and specifically these 3 things are amazing. What you see here, I'm going to scroll down, and what you see here is another teacher that took this exact same idea, but just changed it and modified it a little bit when wanting to make a feedback tool that gave students an easy way, lots of information, lots very specific, and something I could actually do something with as a teacher and a student. Another way that this has come about is in an elementary level with Glow and Grow. This is a strategy that you can probably Google and find. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and it's a simple chart where a student might write self-assessment and a teacher writes assessment of where they're meeting the criteria that they had come about for the writing and areas for improvement, for growing. And it's a simple chart. 1 or 2 things go within this structure for feedback. Or here's another way. One teacher thinking about ways that they might lighten their load or ways that they might provide better feedback. They ask themselves questions about, how's my feedback helping students grow? How are they doing the work? So here's an example that you might like. The hitch was that teachers spend too much time correcting papers, and they weren't really getting feedback in a timely manner. So this teacher found an idea from an NCTE book about post-up proofreading, where students provide really specific response to just parts of student writing. This may or may not be a strategy that you like, but it's a specific tool that one teacher decided to try. So what I want you to do is come up with a possible tool for your feedback. Look back at what you know about feedback now. Look back at your reflections. What did you want to do? And now use that thinking to create a tool that might just work for providing feedback for students. I can't wait to see what y'all come up with.